Poor woman asked to play a broken piano just to humiliate her. Then she blew everyone away. New York City, Astoria Royale Hotel, Friday night. The champagne flutes clinked in rhythm with laughter that danced too easily between the towering chandeliers. The elite cocktail hour at the Astoria Royale was in full swing. Men in sharp suits, women in sleek dresses, servers moving like ghosts between clusters of power and ego. Abigail Monroe moved like she was invisible. She had become good at it. 15 years of pushing a cart filled with lemon-scented cleaners and folded towels had taught her that the less you were noticed, the safer you were. She was wiping down a marble counter near the Grand Lounge when she heard them. "Hey, miss," a voice slurred slightly. "You! Over there? Yeah, with the mop." She looked up, hesitated. A group of men in tuxedos, their ties already loosened, leaned toward her with playful malice in their eyes. One of them pointed toward the black Steinway that stood like a crown jewel in the middle of the lounge. "You look like you could use a break," he chuckled. "Why don't you play us something? I hear all hotel staff are multi-talented these days." There was laughter. Not cruel, not yet, but patronizing, the kind that made your stomach twist. Abigail froze. She had avoided that piano for years. She passed it daily, sometimes twice in a shift. Never touched it. Not once. Another man joined in, grinning. "Come on, darlin', let's see what you've got. Chopsticks? Or maybe just bang on the keys and pretend like it's art?" The bartender paused, glancing at her with the kind of cautious sympathy that wouldn't cost him a tip. Other guests turned their heads. Even the front desk clerk peeked up from behind the marble counter. Abigail didn't move. Then, from deep inside her, where memory still lingered like a stubborn flame, something stirred. She set the rag down. Her hands were trembling, just a little, not from shame, from something else. She walked toward the piano. The men cheered mockingly, raising their glasses. "Here we go! Let's hear the hotel anthem." She didn't look at them. She sat down. The keys felt cold, alive, waiting. She lifted her hands and let them hover, her fingers remembering paths they hadn't walked in more than a decade. Then she played. It wasn't chopsticks. It wasn't anything they'd heard before. It was Rachmaninoff, the second movement from his second concerto, and for a moment it didn't matter who was wearing the designer gown or the $1,000 watch. A hush fell. A server paused mid-step, holding a silver tray. Even the man who made the joke dropped his smirk. Abigail Monroe, cleaning woman of the Astoria Royale, played like someone who had once known the world stage, because she had. When the final note settled into silence, no one moved. Then someone clapped, a soft, uncertain clap. Then another. Then, slowly, a ripple of stunned applause filled the room. Abigail stood quietly. She nodded once and walked back toward her cart. But the story was only beginning. For 2 days, nothing changed. Abigail arrived at the hotel on Monday morning, as always. Quiet, punctual, invisible. She tied her brown hair into a tight bun, buttoned her uniform with practiced hands, and pushed her cart past the grand lobby like the events of Friday evening had been a dream. Or a trick of memory. But she noticed the difference. The doorman nodded. The concierge looked at her longer than usual. A guest near the elevators smiled. Not the absent-minded kind of smile meant for polite dismissal, but a curious, searching one. She felt eyes following her more than before, not with contempt, but something else, a cautious kind of interest. By lunchtime, she understood why. Someone had recorded her performance. The video was spreading, not viral yet, but enough to reach the hotel manager, who summoned her to the office on the second floor. The walls were lined with framed awards, letters from celebrities who had once stayed in the suites upstairs, and a large black-and-white photograph of a younger hotel founder shaking hands with Frank Sinatra. Abigail had never been inside that office, not once in 15 years. Mr. Leeds stood behind his desk, a neatly dressed man with precise hair and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. He motioned to the chair across from him. The laptop on his desk was turned toward her. A paused video showed her in profile, seated at the piano, just before she began to play. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't scold her. Instead, he clicked the play button and let the room fill with the sound she'd spent years trying to forget. When it ended, he simply said, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Abigail didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. The next day, things began to move quickly. Local news outlets started calling the hotel. First, a blog post titled, "The Maid Who Played Rachmaninoff." Then a morning show. A short segment appeared on the regional affiliate of a national network, and people started asking about the woman with the hands of a virtuoso and the uniform of a cleaner. That night, in a tiny apartment on the edge of Queens, a 12-year-old girl named Mia watched the clip on her cracked tablet screen. She played an old keyboard every night after finishing her homework. Her family couldn't afford lessons, but she taught herself through YouTube videos and free apps. When she saw Abigail's face, something in her changed. Here was someone who looked like her mother, who worked the kind of job people didn't applaud, who didn't wear sparkles or speak on stages, but played like her soul was on fire. For the first time, Mia imagined herself playing on a real stage, in front of people who listened. The world noticed, slowly at first. A retired music professor who lived in Brooklyn emailed the hotel, claiming to recognize Abigail's playing style. A few former concert pianists reposted the video with captions like, "This woman was trained. This isn't hobby-level skill." But the truth still lay beneath the surface. Abigail didn't seek attention. She didn't comment. She declined interviews, ignored messages, and continued to scrub marble floors and polish brass handles. She arrived early and left late. She nodded to staff in the hallways, but rarely joined in conversation. What none of them knew was that she barely slept. At night, she dreamed of concert halls, of velvet seats and spotlights, and the rush of adrenaline just before a performance. She remembered her father's voice, soft and steady, telling her to trust the music. She remembered the conservatory, the warm smell of varnished wood, the long hours alone in practice rooms, and she remembered the moment it all ended. The phone call, the hospital, her mother's breath rattling like a broken metronome. She had been 23, a rising star, reviews in the Times, a European tour scheduled, a scholarship renewed. Then everything fell apart. Now, after all those years, it came back to her. Like echoes from a hallway she thought she'd locked behind her. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the joke that started it all, Abigail received a letter in a heavy envelope. No return address. Just her name, written in precise ink. Inside was a card and a single sentence. "Would you consider playing for us again? On stage?" It was signed by the artistic director of the Carnegie Foundation's Emerging Talent Series. She stared at the card for a long time. Later that evening, after her shift ended, Abigail stood alone in the hotel lounge. The Steinway sat silent beneath its soft cover. She pulled it back slowly and pressed one key, an A. It resonated through the room like a whisper of something inevitable. Not hope, not yet, but a beginning. Abigail had never liked mirrors. She had avoided them for years, not because she disliked what she saw, but because they always tried to show her someone she no longer was. a reminder that something bright had been extinguished long ago, and that people had stopped looking for the light. But now the world was knocking again, and before she could open the door, she had to face the shadows behind it. She still had the tapes. In the back of her hallway closet, in an old cardboard box beneath a worn quilt, were a dozen VHS cassettes and a cracked CD case. Recordings of past recitals, early competitions, a televised interview from a local station in Boston when she was just 17. She hadn't watched them in years. That evening, after work, she slid one into the outdated combo player perched under the dusty TV in her living room. There she was, stage lights reflecting off her long black dress. Her face younger, hopeful, untouched by disappointment, fingers flying across the keys with the kind of hunger only youth can truly summon. The applause was loud. She bowed awkwardly, nervously, already looking like someone who didn't quite know how to receive praise. Abigail had grown up in Roxbury, just outside of Boston. Her father had been a postal worker. Her mother, a nurse who often took extra shifts to cover tuition for Abigail's lessons. They had lived modestly, but her talent was unmistakable, even as a child. By 9, she was sight-reading Chopin. By 12, she had performed with the New England Youth Philharmonic. By 14, a scout from the Juilliard pre-college program approached her at a regional competition. Her father had cried when they got the acceptance letter. She left home at 15, commuting by bus to New York every weekend. Her instructors called her disciplined, mechanical, flawless. But her favorite compliment came from her first teacher back home, who once told her, "You don't play the piano, Abigail. You speak through it." At 23, everything seemed to be aligning. She was scheduled to perform at the Musikverein in Vienna that summer. She had a sponsor, a mentor. Critics used phrases like once-in-a-generation precision and the emotional clarity of a poet. Then came the call. It was early morning. Her mother had collapsed at work. A stroke. Abigail flew back to Boston the same day. Her father was already exhausted, barely holding things together. Her mother couldn't speak, couldn't move one side of her body. For a while, she thought she'd return to the tour. Just a few weeks at home, she told her sponsors. Then the months passed. Her mother didn't improve. Her father's health declined. Bills piled up. The conservatory waited. But Abigail stopped answering emails. She never officially withdrew. She just disappeared. By the time her mother passed away 2 years later, the music world had moved on. New talents had emerged. Contacts forgotten, emails deactivated. Her hands, once praised in journals, now scrubbed countertops and hotel floors. The silence became routine, a survival mechanism. She kept her head down and worked. Pride gave way to necessity, but it never fully left her. There were nights she'd wake with melodies in her mind, fragments of Schubert or Debussy haunting her sleep like old friends she'd abandoned. She'd sit in the kitchen in the dark, her fingers twitching on the table as if still moving across keys. Now, all of that was returning. Not as regret. Not yet. But as pressure. Like a weight building behind a dam that had held too long. The Carnegie invitation sat on her kitchen table. She hadn't responded. She didn't know how. Could she really return after nearly 2 decades in silence? Would they expect the girl from those tapes? Technical, dazzling, perfect? Because that girl was gone. But maybe there was something else to offer now. Something deeper. Hard-earned. Something not taught in conservatories. She didn't play for prestige anymore. She played because she had survived. And maybe that was worth something. The invitation expired in 7 days. Abigail knew this not because she counted them, but because she felt each one. It sat in her bag as she mopped the marble floors of the north wing, As she replaced fresh towels in the penthouse suites, as she stood in the staff locker room each night, listening to the silence after everyone else had gone home. She didn't tell anyone about it. Not her supervisor, not the kind receptionist who sometimes brought her leftover pastries, not even her neighbor, Miss Jordan, who often asked about her day through paper-thin walls. But the world didn't wait quietly. On Tuesday morning, a letter arrived at the hotel, handwritten, folded with care. No return address, just "To the piano lady." Inside was a child's drawing. A woman in a gray dress sitting at a giant piano with a bright yellow sun overhead. Next to her, a girl holding a violin, smiling wide. The note below said, "When I grow up, I want to play like you. My name is Mia." Abigail sat in the break room for nearly 10 minutes before she folded the drawing and placed it gently in her pocket. She didn't cry, but something shifted. That night, she called the number on the Carnegie card. The man who answered had a calm voice, surprised but composed. He spoke respectfully. No assumptions, no pressure, just one question. "Would you be willing to share your gift with us, formally?" She said yes. The days that followed passed in a blur. They arranged a short solo set, part of an Emerging Voices series, an ironic name given Abigail's past. She was offered a week to prepare and access to a rehearsal space on the Upper West Side. She hadn't touched a professional piano in nearly 15 years. The first time she sat at the Steinway Model D in the rehearsal room, she hesitated before playing. Her hands hovered above the keys like they were meeting an old friend who might not recognize her anymore. Then she began. The sound was heavier, more resonant. Each note seemed to echo deeper into her memory. She didn't try to impress. She didn't chase speed. She played what she remembered. And more importantly, what she felt. The staff pianist who let her in watched quietly from the hallway. He didn't interrupt. She stayed until the building closed. By the end of the week, news of her upcoming performance had spread beyond New York. The press dug into her past. Old reviews resurfaced. Mentions in archived competition records. A grainy photo from a conservatory newsletter. Abigail Monroe, promising virtuoso of her generation. But now, journalists didn't just see a vanished prodigy. They saw a woman who had vanished and come back. The night of the performance came quickly. The hall was not the grand main stage, but an intimate, warmly lit space with just under 200 seats. The room was full. Not a seat remained. Among the audience were familiar faces, hotel guests who had seen the video, former music students, reporters, a few strangers holding signs that read, "Play Again, Abigail." And somewhere in the third row sat a little girl with a violin case in her lap, flanked by her mother. Mia. Abigail stood backstage in a simple black dress she had borrowed from the wardrobe room of the hotel. Her hands were steady, her heart a little less so. When they called her name, she stepped into the light. The piano gleamed beneath the soft glow. She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She simply sat and played. No flashy intro. No technical fireworks. Just Bach. Then Ravel. Then, finally, her own composition. A quiet, aching piece she'd written one sleepless night years ago and never shared with anyone. The room listened, not to perfection, not to fame, to truth. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, just a silence so full it felt like music. Then it came, slow at first, then rising, and finally a standing ovation that didn't seem to end. She didn't smile, not fully, but her eyes closed for a moment, like she was exhaling something she'd held in for years. Backstage, the artistic director approached her with a contract, a summer series, full exposure, travel, recordings. Abigail held the paper, unread. Then she looked toward the hallway and saw Mia waiting, violin in hand, shy but glowing. She walked over, knelt beside her, and said softly, "Play every day, even when no one's watching." Mia nodded. That night, as Abigail walked home through quiet streets, the city lights dancing off wet pavement, she felt no fear about what came next. Not because she was ready, but because she had finally remembered who she was. The performance at Carnegie didn't make headlines. There were no viral interviews, no dramatic magazine covers. But something quieter happened, something more lasting. The following Monday, Abigail returned to work at the Astoria Royale, not because she had to, because she wanted to. She came in wearing her uniform like always. The manager offered her extended leave. She declined. "A few more days," she said, "until I know what's next." In the lounge, guests occasionally recognized her. Some paused and stared, unsure how to speak to someone who had played Ravel, as if channeling ghosts. Others smiled, said thank you, and moved on. There were letters, emails, a note from a woman in Idaho who had dropped piano lessons at 20 and returned to them at 53 after watching Abigail's performance. A music teacher from Newark who now played her recording before each class. A retired pianist in Arizona who had once competed against her and said he was proud. But it was the letter from Mia that meant the most. Written in pencil, with tiny smudges where the eraser had hesitated. "Dear Miss Abigail, thank you for showing me what music can do. I used to be scared to play in front of people. Now I played at my school concert, and my mom cried. I think she was proud. One day, I want to play next to you. Love, Mia." Abigail kept it in her coat pocket, folded once, perfectly aligned. She didn't return to cleaning full-time. Instead, she accepted a part-time residency at a local conservatory, mentoring young pianists who didn't come from money, who didn't own grand pianos or even proper shoes for recitals. She taught them how to listen before they played, how to let silence speak between notes, and most of all, how to survive the quiet years when no one claps and no one cares, because that's where true musicianship is forged. At the hotel, she became something of a quiet legend. New staff whispered stories about the maid who once played Carnegie. Some doubted it. Others pointed to the old Steinway in the lounge and said, "That's where it happened." The instrument, once mostly decorative, was played more often now. By guests, by staff, by children who passed through the lobby with sticky fingers and endless curiosity. Abigail played too, sometimes in the early morning when the lounge was empty, the city still rubbing sleep from its eyes. She didn't play for anyone, just for herself. One spring afternoon, a woman entered the hotel with a group of tourists. She wore a scarf, a thick accent, and a camera around her neck. She stopped when she saw Abigail behind the front desk, speaking to the new housekeeping supervisor. "You," she said, her voice unsure. "I remember you. From Warsaw, 19 years ago. You played Chopin like you were born in Poland." Abigail blinked, caught off guard. "That was a long time ago." The woman smiled gently. "Yes, but good music never leaves you. It just waits for you to return." She walked away without asking for an autograph, as if that one sentence was enough. In the years that followed, Abigail never became a household name. She didn't tour the world, but she played. She taught. She listened. She lived in a modest apartment and cooked simple food and walked to work when the weather allowed. She didn't chase the spotlight. She no longer needed it. Because one joke had brought her back to the piano. One performance had reopened a closed door. And one little girl, watching from a world away, had reminded her that gifts aren't meant to be buried. They're meant to be shared, even if only one heart listens, even if that heart is your own.